In this video, we're going to try to answer a question. Should you buy the new Sony A7 Mark IV or the Sony A7R Mark IV? I'm going to do a comparison between the basic Pro camera and the highest resolution full-frame camera on the market. So let's talk about it right now. The A7R IV is a camera that came out late 2019 and successor to the popular A7R Mark III, and it brought with it a ton of upgrades, and it is the 4th generation, and the A7 is also the 4th generation. So how far off can they possibly be? Well, a lot. The advantages for the A7 Mark IV. First off, Sony Silicon, aka the Biance XR processor. The brains of the system responsible for the task of converting the sensor signal to photos, video processing, feeding of the EVF, controlling the menu, compression, noise reduction, and more. While the Biance XR processor can be up to 8 times faster, I'll explain later why that might not be such a big advantage. The touch menu is nice because the Sony menu system is deep. Saving a few clicks here and there leads to less frustration, faster access, and a shorter learning curve. The dial and double-decker switch is a clear and big advantage, 6 extra custom modes, and an extra spinning wheel. Imagine using a picture profile PP8 with base ISO of 800 and exposure comp of +2. Reverting those changes can be cumbersome. No simple way around that with the R4. It's a small thing a lot of hybrid users run into. You're getting full-size HDMI because nothing mini or micro is good. Active stabilization and gyro data can give you very stable footage. It's hard enough to make good content. I've tried. The fully articulating screen is great for low-angle portraits or self-absorbed vloggers. This doesn't count. Lossless, compressed, RAW, which is about 20 to 50% smaller than uncompressed. On top of being smaller, we're talking about 120 megabyte files on the R4, paired to 30 to 45 megabytes on the A7 Mark IV, which is much more manageable. The video advantage is substantial. We've got 4K 10-bit 422 all-I with 60p. One of the video feature advantage is focus map, where the out of focus background is blue, out of focus foreground is red, in focus is clear. Another video focus feature is focus breathing compensation, because some lenses expand and contract as you get closer and further away from the lens. Game changer! You've got soft skin mode for the genetically challenged. You've got S-Cinetone, and as defined by its name, all footage using this profile is cinematic. Wow! You can now record 4K in SNQ mode, so that means you have the ability to take time lapses and export them direct to video. Aside from the video features, there are some small and meaningful advantages. Low energy Bluetooth replaces NFC. You have a more durable EVF eyepiece because the JJC replacements are terrible. You've got better webcam compatibility because these Zoom calls are never ending. You've got the shutter sensor cover if you're willing to wait 4 seconds between lens changes. Definitely not going to miss any shots. And lastly, you have stable lugs because the flapping noise you make should be kept to yourself. And now the advantages for the A7R Mark IV. The 61 megapixel backside illuminated Exmor R sensor. That's a lot more than 33. This next feature I mentioned earlier about the Biance XR falling short, that's 7 frames per second uncompressed RAW, while the A7 Mark IV drops to 5. And this doesn't make total sense. That's where I get into the next advantage, and that's the actual buffer. The A7 Mark IV is fast as long as you use CF Express. However, you only get 1 card slot with CF Express. A lot of people will be using dual UHS 2 card slots, and Imaging Resource tested the buffer with a V60 card, which only produces 13 to 14 images. The A7R Mark IV can get around 30 images on a UHS 1 card, so the technical buffer is a lot larger. And this held true when comparing the A7R Mark III and A7 Mark III. The tilt screen, because some people like the discrete nature of this design. The articulating screen is clearly more flexible. However, if you only need that flexibility for less than 10% of the time, that means it's going to be cumbersome for 90% of the time. The stability of the Biance X, slow and steady, wins the race. As a YouTuber, I shoot lots of video, and there are times where the Biance XR base S3 would stop recording and I would lose footage on both cards. Thankfully, the issue is rare and mostly prior to firmware update. No, not a memory card issue. as I've had it happen to Lexar Angelbirds and Sony cards. The rear LCD panel 2 versus 1 million. Pixel shift for ultra high resolution photos 240 megapixels. A 500,000 rated soft shutter assembly. The EVF, it's a glorious 5.4 million dots versus 3.6 million. For the similarities, the Z battery. Both cameras are rated for around 600 still photos or 3 hours of continuous recording. The multi-interface shoe, both cameras can do digital audio. Size and weight, both cameras are north of 650 grams. Both cameras offer the bigger, beefier, and taller grips. Both cameras offer high finder frame rates up to 120 frames per second. Both do 10 frames per second, not the fastest around, however, it's still pretty good. They both have great autofocus in stills and video. And the A7 Mark IV has the addition of Bird AF. They both take dual UHS 2 card slots and the single CF Express for the A7 Mark IV. I'm not counting. Let's break down the resolution. 61 megapixels versus 33 megapixels. That's nearly 2 times the resolution. Does that mean that you'll be able to print twice as large with the A7R Mark IV? No, it doesn't. If we look at the actual resolution numbers, the A7 Mark IV has a width of 7,000 pixels. The A7R Mark IV has a width of 9,500 pixels. That means you'll be able to print roughly 36% larger on the A7R Mark IV and retain the same pixel density. That's roughly like comparing a 50-inch screen TV to a 65-inch TV. Clearly a big difference. Let's break down autofocus for a bit. With high-resolution cameras, accuracy is highly important. A lower resolution shot in focus is better than a high-resolution shot out of focus. This is where the Bionz XR comes into play because precision is king. The fact that the sensitivity goes down to a -4 EV, that means that the camera has a better ability to focus on lower contrast subjects. And I'd say based on experience, that generally leads to more keepers. How much more? Probably not a whole lot. The A7R Mark IV has a very competent autofocus system. If you specialize in birding, the dedicated IAF might be as important as the megapixels. Another subject I want to touch on is the trickiness of using a high megapixel camera. It can be tough to achieve great results. First, there's the noise property, and it's a common sentiment that the higher pixel leads to worse noise performance. If you look at these samples on DP Review, at first glance, this seems to be true. However, if we look at the comparative view, is that really true? You can see in the comparative view, it's very difficult to tell which camera has the best low ISO performance. In the worst case, shooting high ISO, you should be able to achieve comparable performance to sensors known to provide high performance. So with the R4, you may not have an advantage of megapixels in that certain scenario. However, your printed results will be no worse. When it comes to base ISO, images will look more crisp at a comparative view, and there's a lot more room for cropping and printing. To realize the optimum performance of the R4, you generally need higher than normal shutter speeds, 2 times focal length rule, which can lead to increased noise, so it's a delicate balancing act. And then there's the issue of lenses. Not all lenses have the pure power to resolve this 61 megapixel sensor. Even then, with a less than optimal optic, you will be able to pull out more detail with a higher megapixel camera. If you're really into big prints and want to elevate to that next level, the R4 is using the best resolving sensor, achieving near medium format level details. If you're going on a once in a lifetime trip where you want the highest quality prints possible, the R4 is for you. If you're into high-end fashion, landscapes, fine art photos with less emphasis on documentary work, then the R4 is for you. If 40-inch prints is good enough for you and you rarely go over that size, then the A7 Mark IV makes better sense. The files will be much more manageable and it'll take less disk space. If this is your first full frame camera, the A7 Mark IV is for you. It'll be much more user-friendly and you'll learn it much faster. For hybrid shooters that dab into video very often, the A7 Mark IV is clearly for you. It offers much more flexibility for videos and the usability factor is extremely high. If you're disappointed about the 4K 60, you can splurge and get the S3 or the Alpha 1, or if you've ever dealt with Super 35 shooting before, you know that this 16-50 kit lens works just fine. It's dirt cheap, it weighs nothing. Get one. So let me know which camera camp you belong to. Are you part of the high resolution crew or the basic camp? Or are you part of the Alpha 1 crew? Thanks for watching. Hope to see you on the next one. Take care.